The morning of June 7, 2026, dawned bright and full of promise. 4 boys, Leo, Sam, Mike, and Tom, stood at the edge of a vast, untamed jungle. It was a place whispered about in local legends, a world away from their neat suburban homes. Towering trees formed a dense green canopy high above their heads, filtering the sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, sweet flowers, and something wild and ancient. This wasn't just a walk in the park. It was a real expedition into the heart of nature's formidable kingdom. They were ready for an adventure, or so they believed, armed with nothing more than youthful bravado and a couple of smartphones. Their excitement was a palpable force, a buzzing energy that seemed to push back against the jungle's intimidating silence. Leo, the self-appointed leader, checked his phone's map, even though the signal was long gone. Sam was already filming, capturing the immense scale of the trees that looked like green skyscrapers reaching for the sky. Mike pointed at a brilliantly colored butterfly with wings like stained glass, its flight a silent, fluttering dance. Tom, the youngest, just stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and a tiny bit of fear. The jungle was more beautiful and more overwhelming than any picture or video could ever convey. It was a living, breathing entity, and they were about to step inside. With a final, confident nod from Leo, they took their first steps past the invisible boundary that separated their world from the wild. The ground beneath their feet was a soft carpet of fallen leaves and moss, muffling their footsteps almost immediately. The sounds of the modern world faded away, replaced by a symphony of the jungle, the chirping of unseen birds, the buzz of insects, and the distant rustle of something moving through the undergrowth. They felt like true explorers, pioneers charting a new territory. The sheer beauty of the place was intoxicating, making them forget any warnings they might have heard. This was their adventure, their story to tell, and it was just beginning. The path, if you could call it that, was barely visible. It was a faint trail left by animals, winding deeper into the emerald labyrinth. The boys walked in single file, their initial chatter quieting as they focused on navigating the tangled roots and low-hanging vines. Every turn revealed a new wonder, a waterfall cascading down moss-covered rocks, a patch of fungi glowing with an eerie light, or a monkey chattering at them from a high branch. They were completely immersed, disconnected from everything but the present moment. They were small specks in a vast green ocean, unaware that they were not just observers of this world. They were now a part of it, for better or worse. As they ventured deeper, the initial awe transformed into pure, unadulterated joy. The boys' laughter echoed through the trees, a sound so human and out of place in this ancient wilderness. They were completely captivated by their surroundings, their senses on high alert. Sam's phone was constantly in motion, panning across the vibrant green foliage, zooming in on strange insects, and recording short videos of his friends. He narrated their journey with the enthusiasm of a professional documentarian. "Here we see the wild Leo navigating the treacherous terrain," he'd say, as Leo tripped over a root, sparking another round of laughter. Their spirits were soaring, fueled by the thrill of exploration and the strong bond of their friendship. Mike, the group's amateur photographer, was in his element. He was obsessed with capturing the perfect shot, often wandering slightly off the trail to get a better angle of a rare orchid or the way sunlight pierced the canopy. "Guys, hold on! You have to see this!" he would shout, his voice filled with excitement. He took a stunning picture of a poison dart frog, its bright blue skin a stark warning against the brown of a decaying log. He captured a hummingbird, its wings a blur as it hovered over a fiery red flower. Each photo was a trophy, a small piece of the jungle they could take home with them, a testament to their bravery and their incredible journey into this forgotten world. Their adventure felt like a scene from a movie, they swung on thick, sturdy vines, pretending to be Tarzan, their whoops of delight startling a flock of parrots into a kaleidoscope of flight. They splashed their faces with cool, clear water from a stream, the taste of it clean and pure. Tom discovered a trail of huge footprints in the mud near the water's edge, and they spent a good 20 minutes speculating about what kind of giant creature could have made them. They were living a dream, a shared fantasy of being intrepid explorers. The jungle, in its immense beauty, seemed to welcome them, to play along with their games and share its secrets with them. The boys were so engrossed in their fun, so lost in their own world of adventure, that they failed to notice the subtle shifts in their environment. They were making noise, leaving a clear trail, and acting as if they were the masters of this domain. Their phones, symbols of their own world, were their tools for capturing this one, but they offered no real understanding of its rules. They were tourists in a kingdom that demanded respect, not just admiration. Their laughter, while full of life, was a loud announcement of their presence to every creature, both seen and unseen, that called this dense wild forest its home. Unbeknownst to the four jubilant explorers, their cheerful sounds had not gone unnoticed. Deeper within the emerald shadows, a pair of amber eyes had opened. A magnificent Bengal tiger, the true king of this domain, had been resting in the cool shade of a banyan tree. The boys' laughter, a foreign and jarring sound, had disturbed its afternoon slumber. The tiger was a creature of immense power and grace, its striped coat a perfect camouflage that made it virtually invisible amongst the dappled light and shadow of the undergrowth. It rose to its feet in a single fluid motion, its massive paws making no sound on the leafy ground. Its muscles rippled beneath its patterned fur, a silent testament to its raw strength. Curiosity, more than aggression, guided the tiger's initial movements. It had encountered humans before, but usually on the very distant fringes of its territory, their scents carried on the wind. These intruders were different. They were loud, bold, and moving deeper into the jungle's heart, a place where few ever dared to tread. The tiger began to follow them, not as a predator stalking its prey, but as a warden patrolling its land. It moved with an ethereal quietness, a ghost in the jungle. It flowed over the terrain, a silent orange and black river, keeping a safe distance, its every sense finely tuned to the boys' progress and their every action. The tiger observed them from the cover of dense ferns. It watched them swing on vines, their shouts echoing unnaturally in the sacred quiet of its home. It saw the flash of their phone screens, strange artificial lights in a world governed by the sun and moon. The boys were completely oblivious, lost in their own bubble of excitement. The tiger could smell their unfamiliar scent, a mixture of sweat, soap, and synthetic fabrics. It was an alien smell in a world of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the musky aroma of animal life. The tiger's ears, like small radar dishes, swiveled to catch every nuance of their voices, its head tilted in a sign of intense concentration. For nearly an hour, the silent dance continued. The boys moved forward, leaving a trail of noise and disruption, while the tiger shadowed them, a phantom of the forest. It was a master of its environment, using every bush, every tree, every dip in the terrain to remain unseen. It was a game of which the boys were entirely unaware, a one-sided observation. The jungle had its own rules, its own hierarchy, and the boys had unknowingly attracted the attention of its most powerful and majestic inhabitant. The stage was being set for a confrontation, not of malice, but of two worlds colliding in the deep green heart of the wild. The change was subtle at first, a gradual fading of the jungle's vibrant soundtrack. Leo was the first to notice it, pausing mid-sentence. He held up a hand, and the others, seeing the look on his face, fell silent too. The constant chatter of the monkeys had ceased. The incessant chirping of the cicadas had died away. Even the birds seemed to have stopped their singing. The air, which moments before had been filled with a symphony of life, was now heavy with a profound and unnerving silence. It was as if a giant invisible hand had pressed a mute button on the entire forest. The boys looked at each other, their playful smiles replaced with expressions of confusion and unease. The silence was more than just the absence of sound. It was a presence in itself. It felt thick, watchful, and deeply intimidating. The boys, who had been so loud and confident moments ago, now found themselves whispering. "What's going on?" Tom asked, his voice barely audible, his eyes darting nervously into the dense shadows that seemed to be closing in around them. The jungle, which had felt like a beautiful playground, suddenly transformed into a menacing and hostile place. The tall trees no longer looked majestic. They looked like silent, ominous giants looming over them. The vibrant green leaves now seemed to hide countless unseen dangers. Fear, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of their excitement. Sam lowered his phone, the screen's glow seeming foolishly bright in the deepening gloom. The fun had evaporated, replaced by a primal sense of being watched. Every rustle of a leaf, previously ignored, now sounded like a footstep. Every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through their veins. They huddled closer together, their small group a tiny island in a sea of terrifying quiet. The world had shrunk to this small clearing and the impenetrable wall of green that surrounded them. They were no longer explorers, they were trespassers, and the jungle was making its displeasure known. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing second. The air itself seemed to crackle with a tense, static energy. The boys stood frozen, their ears straining to catch any sound that might explain the sudden shift. But there was nothing. Only the heavy, oppressive silence. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a thunderstorm, a stillness pregnant with impending action. The jungle was holding its breath, and the boys found themselves holding theirs too. They were caught in a moment of pure, unadulterated suspense, waiting for something to happen, with no idea what that something could be. They were about to find out. The silence was shattered, not by a sound, but by a movement. From the dense thicket of bamboo to their left, a shape emerged. It was a fluid, powerful motion, a ripple of orange and black that resolved itself into the form of the Bengal tiger. It stepped into the small clearing with a deliberate, regal gait, its massive head held low. The tiger was larger than any of them could have possibly imagined, a creature of breathtaking power and, honestly, terrifying beauty. Its striped coat, which had been perfect camouflage in the shadows, now seemed to burn with an inner fire in the dim light of the clearing. The world seemed to shrink until there was nothing but the boys and the tiger. Panic erupted like a flash flood. The carefully constructed bravado of the four boys crumbled into dust, replaced by raw, instinctual terror. Tom let out a small, choked cry, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the immense presence of the great cat. Mike dropped his phone, the device clattering uselessly on the leafy ground. Sam, who had been filming their entire adventure, stood frozen, his own phone still in his hand but forgotten, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Leo, the leader, felt his legs turn to water. All thoughts of maps, trails, and exploration vanished, replaced by a single, overwhelming reality. They were standing a mere 50 feet from one of the planet's most formidable predators. The boys' reactions were a chaotic symphony of fear. Tom instinctively took a step back, stumbling over a root and falling to the ground. The sudden movement drew the tiger's immediate attention. Its head snapped up, its amber eyes locking onto the fallen boy. Sam, seeing his friend on the ground, let out a yell, a mixture of a warning and a cry for help. Mike, his face pale as a ghost, simply stared, his mind unable to process the scene unfolding before him. Leo, fighting through his own paralyzing fear, grabbed Sam's arm, his mind screaming at them to run, to do something, anything, but his body refused to obey. Time seemed to slow down, stretching each second into an eternity. The tiger had not growled, it had not roared, it had not charged. It simply stood there, a silent, powerful monument to the untamed wild. Its sheer presence was enough to inspire a level of fear that none of the boys had ever known. Their jungle adventure, their fun-filled game, had abruptly ended. This was real. The danger was real. The fear was real. They were no longer playing at being explorers. They were intruders who had come face to face with the rightful king of this kingdom, and they were utterly, terrifyingly at its mercy. In the heart of the chaos, the tiger remained an island of calm. It hadn't charged or shown any signs of overt aggression. Its ears weren't flattened against its head, and its lips weren't curled back in a snarl. Instead, its posture was one of cautious curiosity. The sudden appearance of the boys, their loud noises, and their panicked reactions were all new stimuli in its environment, and honestly, it was just processing the information. The tiger's gaze, intense and unwavering, shifted from one boy to the next, assessing the situation. It wasn't the cold, calculating look of a hunter sizing up its prey, but rather the watchful stare of a proprietor inspecting unexpected and unruly guests. The great cat took a slow, deliberate step forward, its massive paws making no sound on the forest floor. Its tail, a long striped pendulum, twitched slightly from side to side, a sign of alertness and mild agitation, not imminent attack. The tiger was wary. These creatures were unfamiliar. They were bipedal, loud, and moved in unpredictable ways. The tiger's instincts, honed over generations of jungle life, told it to be careful. It was a territorial animal, and the boys had wandered deep into its territory. Its presence was a declaration, a silent statement that this land belonged to it, and their intrusion was a breach of protocol. The tiger's attention was particularly drawn to Tom, who was still scrambling backward on the ground, and to Sam, who had shouted. These were sudden, jarring actions in the otherwise still clearing. The tiger lowered its head slightly, its eyes narrowing as it tried to understand these strange behaviors. It had no concept of play, fear, or panic in the human sense. It only understood the language of the wild, the posture of a threat, the scent of fear, the sound of a challenge. The boys, in their terror, were sending a flurry of confusing signals. The tiger wasn't angry. It was simply trying to read a language it didn't speak. Looking at the scene from the tiger's perspective, the situation was clear. Its quiet domain had been invaded by noisy, unpredictable beings. Its primary goal wasn't to hunt, as it wasn't hungry, but to ensure the intruders posed no threat to it or its territory. Its slow advance and unwavering stare were a form of intimidation, a non-violent method of asserting dominance and encouraging the intruders to leave. It was a powerful, silent warning, a message delivered with the sheer force of its presence. The tiger wasn't a monster. It was a wild animal acting on instinct, a guardian of its realm confronted with the unknown. The fragile standoff was shattered by a single, desperate act. Leo, finally breaking free from his fear-induced paralysis, did the only thing he could think of to create a diversion. He grabbed a small hollow log from the ground beside him and, with a guttural yell, hurled it into the dense bushes to the side of the tiger. The log crashed through the leaves with a loud, startling noise. The effect was immediate. The tiger, its attention momentarily broken from the boys, flinched and spun around to face the new unseen threat. Its body tensed, and for the first time, a low rumbling growl emanated from its chest, a sound that vibrated through the very ground. That single moment of distraction was the opening the boys needed. "Run!" Leo screamed, the word tearing through the tense silence. His voice broke the spell of fear that had held them captive. Adrenaline surged through their veins, overriding every other thought and emotion. Tom scrambled to his feet, propelled by a primal fear he had never known. Sam, dropping his phone without a second thought, turned and bolted. Mike was right behind him. They ran blindly, not caring about the path, their only goal to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the terrifying creature of orange and black. Their retreat was a panicked, clumsy scramble. They crashed through the undergrowth, thorns and branches tearing at their clothes and scratching their skin. They didn't feel the pain. They didn't look back. The only sound they could hear was the thunder of their own hearts and the gasping of their own breath. They ran harder and faster than they had ever run in their lives, fueled by the image of the tiger burned into their minds. The beautiful, magical jungle had transformed into a terrifying maze of obstacles, each vine a potential tripwire, each shadow a lurking threat. They were no longer adventurers. They were fugitives fleeing for their lives. Back in the clearing, the tiger watched them go. The loud crash of the log, followed by the sudden, frantic retreat of the boys, had only added to its confusion. After a moment of assessing the bushes where the log had landed, it turned its head back towards the fleeing figures. It saw their panicked flight, heard their crashing progress through the forest. It took a few bounding steps in their direction, not in pursuit, but as a final assertion of its dominance, a powerful gesture to hasten their departure. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it stopped. The intruders were leaving. Its point had been made. The tiger turned and, with a flick of its tail, melted back into the shadows of the jungle, its domain once again its own. The boys ran until their lungs burned and their legs felt like lead. They didn't stop until the sounds of their panicked flight were the only sounds they could hear. Finally, gasping for air, Leo stumbled to a halt, leaning against a massive tree. The others collapsed around him, a huddled mess of scraped knees, torn shirts, and heaving chests. They were miles, or what felt like miles, from the clearing. The immediate, heart-stopping fear had subsided, replaced by the trembling aftershocks of adrenaline. For a long time nobody spoke. They just listened, their ears straining for any sound of pursuit. But the jungle had returned to its normal, vibrant hum. Slowly, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were alive, they were safe. The tiger was gone. The relief was so profound, it was physically painful. Tom started to cry, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming release of tension. Sam put a comforting arm around him, his own hands still shaking. Mike was staring blankly into the distance, replaying the encounter in his head. Leo, despite his own terror, knew he had to get them moving. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "We need to find the edge of the forest before it gets dark." Gathering their scattered wits, they started the long journey back. Their movements were no longer joyful or confident. They were slow, cautious, and deliberate. Every shadow made them jump, and every rustle in the undergrowth sent a fresh wave of fear through them. The jungle no longer felt like a playground. It felt like a dangerous, unpredictable entity that had merely tolerated them before deciding they had overstayed their welcome. They stayed close together, drawing comfort from each other's presence. The laughter and jokes were gone, replaced by a somber, shared understanding. They had seen the true face of the wild, and it had humbled them completely. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, they finally saw it. A break in the canopy, a line where the dense green met the lighter blue of the sky. They stumbled out of the jungle and back into the familiar world of open fields and distant roads, blinking in the late afternoon light. They had made it. They collapsed onto the soft grass, exhausted in body and spirit. They looked back at the dark, impenetrable wall of trees they had just emerged from. They had gone in as cocky adventurers, and had come out as chastened survivors, forever changed by their brief, terrifying encounter with the king of the jungle. Days after their harrowing escape, The boys were still processing what had happened. The scrapes and scratches healed, but the memory of the tiger remained, vivid and powerful. They didn't talk about it much with anyone else. How could they explain the sheer terror, the profound awe, the feeling of being so small and insignificant in the face of such raw, natural power? Their phones, which had been their tools for capturing the adventure, now held no evidence of the most crucial part. Sam's phone was lost to the jungle floor, and Mike's photos of frogs and flowers seemed to belong to a different, more naive trip. The most important moments had been too intense to be recorded. They had gone into the jungle, seeking thrills and a story to tell, and they had certainly found them, but not in the way they had expected. They had learned that the wild is not a theme park. It doesn't exist for human entertainment. It is a complex, balanced system with its own rules, its own dangers, and its own royalty. The tiger wasn't a monster from a horror movie. It was a magnificent creature protecting its home. They realized their laughter, their shouts, and their careless exploration were an intrusion, a disturbance in a world that demanded quiet respect. They had acted like owners in a place where they were merely fleeting guests. The experience forged a new and deeper respect for nature within them. They began to see the world differently. A local park was no longer just a patch of grass, but a small, tamed echo of a much larger, wilder world. They read books and watched documentaries about conservation, about the shrinking habitats of animals like the Bengal tiger. They understood now, in a way they never could have before, why these wild places were so important and why they needed to be protected. Their fear had been replaced by a profound and lasting sense of awe and a desire to preserve the very wilderness that had terrified them. Their jungle adventure had indeed gone wrong, but from that wrongness came a powerful and life-altering lesson. It was a lesson not learned in a classroom or from a screen, but from the amber eyes of a tiger in the heart of the forest. They had learned about courage, not the loud, boisterous kind, but the quiet kind that helps you get back up and move forward. Most importantly, they had learned about respect. Respect for the power of nature, for the creatures that inhabit it, and for the invisible line between the human world and the wild. And that was a story far greater than the one they had originally set out to